They slammed my father against a wall for smuggling a pet, but it was just my baby's toy cat, and what happened next left everyone speechless. They slammed my father into a wall for smuggling a pet, thinking no one would notice. They didn't realize the pet was my baby's toy cat, and the moment his hands hit the wall, a storm of consequences had already begun. Subscribe if you believe arrogance collapses the second real strength rises. The soft electronic beep as they passed through the scanner was barely noticeable to most travelers, a background noise in the usual hum of Halvard Terminal's checkpoint hall. But it made Security Officer Brennick Vale straighten his shoulders and tilt his head. His eyes narrowed as they locked onto the small plush cat resting in the hands of a 12-year-old boy. "Step aside, please," Brennick called out, but his voice blended into the crowd shuffle. Dr. Kalen Maris kept walking, unaware of the scrutiny now trailing him. His infant son Laron stirred softly against his chest in a front carrier harness, his tiny hands twitching reflexively at every echo that bounced off the tall glass walls of the terminal. Yarrick, walking beside him, hugged the plush toy cat closer to his hoodie, instinctively, protectively. The toy's faint vibration was designed to calm infants in stressful environments. It hummed gently now, unnoticed by most, except one. Brennick didn't break pace as he tapped his clipboard twice and muttered into his collar mic, "Passenger group, line 2, possible untagged companion unit, mark for follow-up." From across the checkpoint hall, Officer Dorencall caught the signal. His gloved fingers paused mid-note, then moved discreetly to his radio. "Tracking 1 to 7. Notify upper deck. Unusual object pass scanner, with a regular signature." His tone was flat, but his eyes followed the trio with growing suspicion. Kalen adjusted the strap on Laron's carrier, feeling the slight shift in weight as the baby settled back to sleep. His breath warmed the infant's head. "You okay, Yarrick?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Need a break before we board?" "I'm okay," Yarrick replied, then hesitated. That guard, the one with the square shoulders, he was staring at Bristle. Kalen glanced at the plush toy. Maybe he just liked cats. Yarrick didn't smile. No, it was different, like he thought it was real. Kalen chuckled softly, thinking it was just a kid's anxiety getting the better of him. "You know what Bristle is. I know what Bristle is. As long as Laron stays calm, we're all good." He didn't notice the way Officer Brennick scribbled something again. He didn't see the way Doran's eyes darted between them and the scanner logs. And he didn't hear the low murmurs between two supervisors standing near the side glass railing. "Bio-pets on the rise again," one whispered. "Concealed in toys, backpacks, even jackets. The alerts have doubled since that breach in Vervalport." Kalen had no idea those words were even being said. He had no reason to suspect anything. After all, his objective was straightforward. Travel to Velvar City, present his research at the International Medical Ethics Conference, and return with his sons after defending a new proposal that could reshape patient rights across terminal-based treatment zones. Yarrick gently pressed Bristle to his baby brother's cheek. The cat vibrated again, and Laron cooed in response, the tiniest smile forming on his lips. For a moment, everything felt normal, but several paces back, Officer Dorencall read from a sensor log and frowned. "Echo trace shows intermittent signature on item marked Unit B. It doesn't read as fabric." "Or the false flag," Brennick muttered, but then his expression hardened. "Or its disguise." Yarrick slowed slightly as they approached Gate 42B. The hallway narrowed there, becoming quieter, less crowded. A breeze from a nearby duct stirred a few loose wrappers on the floor. It was a kind of in-between space that made children uneasy and made certain adults feel watched. Kalen noticed Jarrick's grip on Bristle tighten again. "Something else bothering you?" Yarrick nodded, eyes low. The guard didn't blink when Bristle beeped. Kalen exhaled, glancing over his shoulder, but the walkway behind him was full of travelers. Nothing seemed out of place. He offered a calm smile. "We're almost there. Maybe grab a snack before we board." But before they could decide, a voice barked from behind. "Sir, one moment, please." Brennick Vale's tone was clipped, official, and left no room for misunderstanding. Kalen turned, brows raised but not alarmed. "Yes." Brennick's expression, was unreadable. "We need to inspect your personal items before you proceed to boarding." Kalen gestured toward his open bag. "Of course. Standard procedure." "No, sir," Doran added, stepping up behind Brennick. "Specific directive. Unregistered device pass scanner irregularly." Kalen blinked. "Device?" Doran pointed. "Of course," he said calmly, adjusting the strap of the infant carrier on his chest. Laron, his youngest, stirred gently against him, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The older officer, whom Kalen recognized from earlier as Officer Brennick Vale, took a deliberate step forward, his gaze locked not on the father, but on the toy in the child's hands. He didn't blink. "Hand over the object," Brennick said coldly, extending a gloved hand toward Yarrick. The phrasing caught Kalen off guard. "The object?" Kalen echoed, glancing down at the plush toy nestled in his son's arms. "It's a comfort toy. My son's. It helps calm the baby when things get too loud." "He means Bristle," Yarrick said quietly, lifting the plush cat and offering it forward, though his grip hesitated. His fingers curled around the synthetic fur, as if it might vanish the moment he let go. "He's not dangerous," the boy added. Brennick didn't respond. He took the toy with a brisk snatch, as if extracting contraband. His fingers pressed along the seams methodically, like someone checking for seams in a smuggler's pouch. The younger officer, his badge read Doran call, stepped to the side and began inputting something into his wrist device. Kalen couldn't see the screen, but he noticed how often the man's eyes darted between Jarrett's expression and the back of the plush toy. "What's this about?" Kalen asked carefully. His voice remained even professional, not confrontational, just curious. Brennick didn't answer. Instead, he squeezed the toy again, bringing it closer to his ear. Bristle emitted a faint purring sound, the gentle vibration of a low-battery motor that mimicked the soft mechanical cat's breath. The sound was familiar to the family, harmless, soothing, but to Brennick, it was something else entirely. "There's something inside," he muttered. "That's the motor," Yarrick whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "It's always done that." Kalen stepped forward, not aggressively, but with firm posture. "Officer, this is a medically approved sensory toy. It's been through 2 scanners already. It's designed to help regulate stimuli for infants like my son." "Step back, sir," Doran interjected, his voice quieter but nervous. He wasn't as composed as Brennick. This could fall under concealed organism protocols. Kalen froze. Concealed what? Behind them, a few passengers had begun to slow their walk toward the nearby gates, picking up on the friction. One man even doubled back slightly to observe. Among them stood Selric Thane, the quiet traveler who had passed earlier, now watching from behind a column, his head tilted ever so slightly as if he were listening not just with his ears, but with his instincts. Brennick was now speaking into a small comm unit on his collar. "Gate 42B. Possible Category 3 concealment in violation. Requesting clearance for containment inspection." Jarrick's hand reached for his father's. "He's not alive. Bristle's not alive. They're acting like he is." "I know," Kalen whispered back, trying to keep his voice steady for both his sons. "It's a mistake. We'll clear it up." But deep down, his policy analyst brain, the one trained to spot procedural breakdowns, was already activating. He recognized the tone in Brennick's voice, the language, the escalation pattern. He had seen it before, in reports, in security memos, in emergency reviews. It was the kind of language that didn't step back. It only built upward. "I'm going to ask again," Brennick said without looking at Kalen. "Have you or any member of your party transported a bio-enhanced or genetically modified pet through unregistered channels today?" "What?" Kalen blinked. "No, we haven't transported anything. That's a child's toy." "Is it registered with customs?" "It's not a living thing," Kalen said, a bit sharper now. "It's a sensory plush. You can check the manufacturer tags." But Brennick was already pulling out a small containment pouch, the kind used for biological items that could bite or leak. Doran stepped slightly between the officer and Kalen, not aggressively, perhaps even protectively. though uncertain. I'm just going to note for record, Doran muttered, tapping his wrist device again. Possible anomalous movement in response to tactile input. Internal vibration detected. Flagging category. His voice trailed off as Bristle purred again, louder this time, the result of pressure applied to its side. Several travelers jumped. Kalen didn't. That's the low battery function, he explained calmly. It emits a louder purr when power is running out. It's literally designed to do that. Doran's eyes twitched toward him but said nothing. Brennick snapped the pouch closed and sealed the toy inside. We'll need to ask you to accompany us for questioning, Brennick stated, nodding toward the hallway adjacent to the gate. All three of you. You're detaining us? Kalen asked, keeping his tone measured. Inspection protocol, Doran said, his voice now lacking the conviction of before. Kalen looked down at his sons. Laron was stirring in the carrier, beginning to fuss. Jarek's face was pale, the muscles in his jaw locked as if he were holding in a scream. I haven't broken any laws, Kalen said slowly. And if this is about a misunderstanding, we should clear it right here. You can make your statement inside the inspection zone, Brennick replied, already turning to lead the way. A moment of pause hung heavy in the air. Kalen's instincts urged him to de-escalate, to protect his children from whatever theater this had become. But another part of him was already tallying the procedural errors, the assumptions, the overreach. Selric Thane, still watching from a distance, turned slightly and tapped something into his personal terminal. His expression was unreadable, but his presence, silent and watchful, hinted at another thread pulling tight in the background. As Kalen took his first step toward the inspection corridor, he gently rested his hand on Jarek's shoulder. Stay close to me, he murmured, and don't let go of your brother. Yarrick nodded, holding Laron carefully as if the infant's fragile weight could anchor them all to reason. Behind them, the boarding gate continued to beep softly for waiting passengers, unaware that one of the quietest, simplest objects had just been mistaken for a threat. The simplest object was about to trigger the largest conflict. Hand it over, Officer Brennickvale said, extending his gloved hand toward Yarrick, his eyes fixed with unsettling intensity on the small plush cat cradled in the boy's arms. Yarrick hesitated, his fingers tightening instinctively around the soft toy. It's just Bristle, he said softly, voice cracking with unease. It helps my baby brother sleep when it's noisy. Brennick didn't blink. Now. Yarrick looked to his father. Kalen gave a calm nod. It's okay, Yarrick. Let them see it. The boy reluctantly extended the stuffed animal. As soon as it reached Brennick's hand, the officer gave an aggressive squeeze, eliciting a soft mechanical whir. It was the toy's vibration module, standard in soothing devices for infants. But Brennick's eyes widened as though he'd uncovered a living thing hidden beneath the synthetic fur. There's movement, he muttered. Kalen blinked in confusion. Yes, it vibrates. It's built to simulate purring. Like a cat. That's the point. But Brennick wasn't listening. He turned toward Officer Dorencall and gave a curt nod. Doran tapped the comm device on his wrist and said, Backup requested, possible concealed bioform. Gate 42B. Repeat, possible bioform. Kalen's brows furrowed. Excuse me? A bio what? Doran didn't answer. Passengers nearby paused mid-step. A few exchanged puzzled glances. One man whispered, Are they serious? The tension in the air coiled tighter when a nearby supervisor, a stocky man named Relendrav, strode toward them with purpose in his step and a folder tucked under one arm. His voice cut through the building murmur. Halvard Terminal has encountered bio-smuggling rings before. We don't take risks. With all due respect, Kalen said calmly, that's a child's comfort toy. My son explained it. I can show you the inside. Not another word. Brennick snapped. You're not authorized to tamper with potential evidence. Evidence? Kalen's voice remained level, but his chest tightened. It's made of fabric and foam. There's nothing to tamper with. As if summoned by the rising tension, Bristle let out a low, drawn-out purr, a sound longer and louder than usual due to its nearly drained battery. Kalen knew it well. It always did that before powering off completely. But Brennick staggered back, nearly dropping the toy. It's vocalizing. It's programmed to do that. Kalen said, raising his hand slightly in frustration. That's how it calms infants. Doran leaned in closer and whispered just loud enough for Kalen to hear. If this goes wrong, the council will blame us again. Kalen froze. That wasn't about the toy. That was about politics. Internal pressure boiling under the surface. These men weren't reacting to a threat. They were reacting to fear blame. Kalen tried again, slower this time. Let me open the toy. Right now. You'll see for yourself there's nothing inside. No, Brennick said sharply. If there's something living in there, it might escape. Jarek's voice trembled. It's just bristle. Please, don't hurt my dad. Laron, sensing the escalating tension, let out a sharp cry from Jarek's arms. The baby's wail echoed through the terminal. More heads turned. Passengers began reaching for their phones. Some were already recording. Kalen noticed a red light on a phone held by a man across the aisle, and something in him clicked into caution. He remained perfectly still, body relaxed, but voice firm. There's no smuggling. You're overreacting. My name is Dr. Kalen Maris. I'm a policy analyst for medical transit safety. But Brennick didn't wait for him to finish. With abrupt force, he stepped forward, grabbed Kalen by the arm, and spun him around. You're under investigation for attempting to smuggle a prohibited bioorganic form through a secure zone, he declared, voice raised loud enough for the entire gate to hear. Kalen felt his chest hit the cold terminal wall. He didn't resist, but his voice rose in urgency. This is a mistake. That's a child's toy. More gasps came from the surrounding passengers. One woman clutched her bag to her chest, whispering to the man beside her, Why are they doing this? He's got a baby. Another traveler muttered, This can't be real. It's a stuffed cat. Brennick pulled Kalen's arms behind his back with practiced force. Doran stepped in to assist, glancing nervously toward the crowd. Even he seemed unsure now, but procedure had already been activated. Backing down would mean admitting error, and that, it seemed, was a greater sin in Halvorth Terminal. I will cooperate fully, Kalen said, voice even, despite the pressure in his shoulder joints. But I demand that someone look inside the toy. Right now. Protocol restricts direct dissection of potential biothreats in uncontrolled environments, Relendrav announced, his tone bureaucratic and unmoved. Contamination risk is too high. Kalen looked over his shoulder at the man. You're afraid of a plush toy infecting the terminal? Relen didn't flinch. We follow policy. No exceptions. Yerrick ran forward, eyes wide with panic. Dad! A staffer intercepted him gently but firmly, pulling him back with a hand on his shoulder. Please stay behind the barrier. Son, it's for safety. Laron's cries sharpened, now frantic and piercing. The sound clawed at the moment, cutting into the air like sirens. But the officers didn't relent. Kalen stood restrained, his body pressed to cold glass, watching his sons from the corner of his eye. Inside the crowd, one figure remained still. Selric Thane, the quiet man who had earlier warned them. He hadn't moved since the commotion started. But now his eyes narrowed, and his hand slid discreetly toward a small device clipped to his jacket. Something not issued by the terminal. Something quietly active. Meanwhile, Doran stepped back with the toy, holding it gingerly, as if it were primed to explode. The purring had stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. This is escalating beyond reason, Kalen said, breathing heavily. You're detaining a father over a toy. Brennick stared forward, unmoved. We don't take chances. And in that moment, as dozens of passengers recorded, as two children cried in confusion and fear, and as a harmless toy cat was carried off in a sealed container, something irreversible happened. The truth had no room to speak. It had been drowned by fear, by error, by policy. The moment spiraled into something no one expected. Misunderstanding had become accusation in a single breath. Brennick Vale slammed Kalen Maris against the cold wall beside the boarding tunnel, with force that echoed through the gate. The polished metal clanged behind Kalen's shoulder as his briefcase fell to the floor, its contents spilling, documents, a folder, a pacifier. The crowd gasped in unison. A mother nearby instinctively pulled her child closer. A businessman dropped his coffee. Yarrick froze mid-step, clutching baby Laron in his arms. The infant began to wail, startled by the violence, the noise, the sudden jolt in the air. Jarrick's own voice cracked. "Stop it." "He didn't do anything," he shouted, but his feet stayed rooted, fear locking his knees. Brennick's jaw was tight, his face a mask of rigid suspicion. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked at Kalen, pressing his forearm against the man's back. "You're in violation of the Biological Concealment Act." Kalen twisted slightly, still pinned but steady, his voice firm though his breath was shallow. "That's a child's toy, officer. My name is Dr. Kalen Maris. I'm a registered medical researcher. Check your records." Doran calls to a few feet away, gripping the plush toy cat Bristle with an oddly cautious stare. The toy emitted a soft whir, then a warbling sound that vaguely resembled a cry. Yarrick tried to speak through his panic. "It's just a battery. It always makes that sound when it's low." But Brennick only glanced back and snarled, "That's a containment distress call. It's breathing. We heard it earlier." "It's a toy," Kalen repeated, more to himself now, stunned that reason was unraveling this quickly. Selric Thane, still standing near the security line, narrowed his eyes. He watched the guards with subtle recognition in his expression. There was history here, unspoken and bitter. He took a slow step forward, but stayed just behind the gathering crowd. Voices rose behind him. "This is wrong," said one passenger. "They have a baby, for heaven's sake," added another. A young man filmed quietly from behind his phone, catching every second. Doran hesitated. His grip on Bristle loosened slightly. "Sir," he murmured to Brennick, "I'm not getting any life signature from this. Do you want to be the one responsible if it is something?" Brennick shot back. "Protocol is clear. Containment over discretion." Yarrick stepped forward now, trembling but determined. "Just open it, please. Cut it open. You'll see it's just stuffing and wires." Relin Drav appeared to the side hallway, his blue supervisor tag swinging from his lanyard. "Absolutely not," he said sharply. "No tampering on site. If that thing is organic, opening it here risks contamination or escape." "Escape? It's stitched cloth." Kalen growled, trying not to raise his voice but overwhelmed by the absurdity. Brennick tightened the grip on his restraint device. "You've been flagged, sir. Hands behind your back." Kalen didn't resist, but his eyes locked with his son's. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, watching Jarrick's arms tighten protectively around Laron. But the baby's cries were loud now, echoing off the terminal's high glass walls, a piercing wail that bounced down the gate like a siren of protest. Travelers gathered more tightly, murmurings turning to shouts. "Let him go. You've got the wrong guy. This isn't how you treat a father." One man stepped closer with a frown. "I work for Ground Medical. That's a sensory toy. My niece has the same one." Relin snapped back. "This isn't a debate. Back up or be removed." Kalen gritted his teeth, forced to comply as the cold clamor of a detainment restraint clicked around one wrist, then the other. The band of metal bit into his skin. Still, he didn't struggle. From the crowd, Selric's voice rose, calm but direct. "You're making a mistake. Again." His tone turned some heads, but the officers ignored him. Officially, he was no one. Doran's hands were shaking now, and his eyes flicked down to Bristle once more. The toy had gone silent, limp in his palm. "Just cloth. Just wires. I request that you stop and assess," Kalen said with effort. "I have nothing to hide. I'll open the toy myself, right here, right now." Brennick's response was final. "You'll do so under supervision, in containment. We're not taking chances with biothreats, especially not after last month." "Last month?" Kalen echoed, breathing heavily. "I've been flagged over misreading?" Relin didn't answer. Instead, he motioned toward a private hallway leading to the detainment wing. "Escort him. We'll assess the object in secondary scan. Follow full protocol." Yarrick shouted, pushing forward again. "I want to go with him." "You can't," snapped Relin. Miners stay back unless cleared. Someone take the child. A nearby attendant stepped forward, but Yarrick dodged him, pressing Laron tighter to his chest. "I'm his son," he cried. "We haven't done anything." Kalen turned his head as they pulled him away. His voice was calm despite the chaos. Stay with your brother. Don't let go. The restraints tightened again. The hallway darkened around them as they approached the private wing. The air cooler, sterile. Behind them, the terminal buzzed with tension, passengers filming, guards barking orders, whispers building like a storm cloud. Selric pulled out his device, fingers moving swiftly. Somewhere, he was sending a message. Doran looked down at the toy again. "It's not alive," he said under his breath. Brennick didn't respond. But the cameras above them, their small green lights blinking steadily, had caught it all. The grip of protocol had pulled too tightly, and the wall they pushed him against was about to reveal everything. They yanked him from the boarding gate with such urgency that it shattered the illusion of protocol. Kalen Mara stumbled as the officers tightened their grip on his arms, dragging him past stunned passengers and murmurs of disbelief. One child cried out, his own. Jarek's voice rang out to the terminal, high and sharp. "Dad." But a uniformed staffer quickly stepped between them, placing a hand on the boy's chest. "For safety, young man," the staffer muttered, eyes not meeting his. Yarrick didn't budge, clutching his infant brother Laron tightly to his chest, as if the boy's crying could somehow protect them all. The plush toy cat Bristle had been left behind on the security table, its faint electronic purr lost amid the rising tension. Around them, a crowd was forming, phones raised, recording what looked less like an airport detainment and more like a public mistake unraveling in real time. Inside a low-lit secondary room, Kalen was forced into a reinforced polyfiber chair, wrists still restrained, posture upright despite the bruising force that had brought him here. His breath was measured. He wasn't afraid. Not yet, but he was deeply aware this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a machinery of fear and motion, built on assumption, unchecked authority, and a toy mistaken for threat. Across from him, encased in a sealed glass container, sat Bristle. A scanning technician named Velric adjusted his gloves and sighed under his breath. He was thin, older, with heavy bags under his eyes that suggested too many night shifts and too little clarity. A diagnostic scanner was mounted on a swiveling arm beside the table, blinking slowly in standby. The process they were about to initiate wasn't standard. Velric knew that. Everyone in the room did. The protocol was based on a hasty directive passed just weeks ago by the Halvorth Risk Protocol Board, one that allowed detention and scan of potential concealment objects exhibiting pseudobiological emissions. Velric tapped the console, and the scanner hummed to life, casting a pale green cone of light across the plush cat. "Initializing variable resonance echo test," he muttered, mostly for the record. Kalen watched silently, eyes narrowed. On screen, the object shape registered quickly, standard plush dimensions, no hidden compartments. But then a flicker. The scanner picked up an internal chamber, hollow but acoustically active. "Echo chamber," Velric said aloud. "Define," barked Officer Brennickvale from behind him. Velric didn't flinch. It's common in toys that have built-in purring or voice modules. Amplifies low-end sound for calming effects. Brennick stepped closer. "And no biological markers," Velric replied, a touch more firmly now. "No heat signature. No organic mass. Just stuffing, plastic mesh, and a power cell." Brennick crossed his arms. "Scan anomalies don't mean safety. Keep going." Kalen exhaled slowly, voice measured. "I'm telling you, Bristle is a comfort device. For my son. That's all it is." Brennick ignored him. Meanwhile, in an adjacent room, Yarrick sat alone at a round table, legs swinging above the floor. Laron dozed against his chest in small sobs. A second officer, not cruel but conditioned, spoke to him in soft, overly careful tones. "Is this toy new, son?" Yarrick shook his head. "We've had Bristle since Laron was born. And it purrs." Yarrick nodded again. It helps when loud noises scare him. The officer scribbled something. "Has anyone else touched it today?" "No," Yarrick said, a little sharper this time. "Just me. It's mine." Back in the scan room, Velric leaned in, frowning. The readings were consistent, safe, unremarkable, but the internal vibration coil was sending strange reflections to the scanner, the kind that someone looking for trouble might call unclassified movement. He hit pause. The data froze. Velric hesitated. His fingers hovered over the export function. Something inside him, the same part that had once wanted to be an engineer for medical systems, not airport scanners, said, "This is wrong." In a quiet motion, he pulled a personal storage chip from his lanyard, slotted it beneath the console, and copied the scan logs. He said nothing. Brennick stood just feet away, arms folded like a man certain of his righteousness. "This'll be flagged," he muttered. "They'll thank us later when the report shows we took no chances." "No one's thanking anyone for mistaking a toy for a threat," Kalen said, voice calm but low with steel. Brennick turned, ready to retort, but paused. The man in the chair didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a father who'd just been separated from his sons. And for the first time, that image didn't fade easily, but pride outweighed doubt. Brennick turned away. Velric removed the scan chip, wiped the console view, and placed the toy gently back into the container. Then he looked up and spoke to no one in particular. Scan completed. No indicators consistent with bio-smuggling profiles. Internal mechanisms consistent with commercially available therapeutic plushies. Recommend downgrade to observation level 1. Brennick didn't reply. Outside the room, the terminal was buzzing with something new. Doubt. Travelers replayed their footage. A few had already uploaded clips to commuter news apps. Quiet murmurs turned into phrases. Was that a toy? He didn't fight back. That baby was screaming. Inside, Velric pocketed the chip. Later, he would justify it to himself as precaution, not defiance. But in truth, something had shifted. The man they detained hadn't raised his voice. The boy hadn't lied. The scanner hadn't glitched. What had failed was judgment. Velric glanced at Kalen, then at the sealed, plush toy. The evidence of their error had just been backed up by the quietest man in the room. Brennick Vale's fingers hovered over the detainment log as he prepared the final arrest order. The room was stark, bare metal walls, one flickering ceiling light, and a heavy sense of overconfidence clinging to every corner. Across from him, Dr. Kalen Maris sat upright in the reinforced chair, wrists still unbound but surrounded by implication. His voice had been calm for nearly 15 minutes, but every rational sentence he offered had fallen like feathers into a stone well. "I'm requesting legal representation," Kalen said again, voice firm but controlled. Brennick didn't look up. He muttered, "Halvrith operates under immediate safety override. Your request is noted." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "I know. I wrote the clause." That made Brennick pause. Just for a second, a tick in his jaw. Then he pushed the tablet forward, tapping the arrest protocol again. "Then you should understand why we can't take chances." Outside the room, near the gathering crowd by Gate 42B, Selric Thane stood in the shadow of a column, fingers curled around a slim device barely visible in his palm. His voice was quiet, but his words cut clean. "They've done it again. False flag on a family. Halvrith Terminal," he said. On the other end, Marin Kaur, compliance investigator for the Independent Travel Equity Review Board, sat upright in a dim office 2 cities away. He didn't ask for clarification. "Footage?" "Streaming now," Selric said, his thumb swiping across the screen to upload both his own video and the terminal's public camera feed, accessed through a login that should have expired months ago. He had once worked tech at Halvrith. They hadn't changed the clearance codes. That was their mistake. Back in detainment. Officer Dorencall entered the room with a grim expression. "Supervisor says to finalize the report. No delays." Kalen glanced between them. "You still haven't opened the toy. You're holding a family over assumptions." Brennick scoffed. "You think smugglers don't disguise threats in children's items? We've been briefed. Hollow plushes. Synthetic organisms. You know how many things purr when they shouldn't. And how many of them were actually alive?" Kalen asked sharply. Brennick didn't answer. He turned to Doran. "Run the classification code. Tag it under Class B bioform with unknown concealment status." Doran hesitated. His hand hovered above the tablet. Skin didn't show respiration. "It pinged motion echoes," Brennick said. It pinged sound feedback. Doran corrected. Quieter now, like cheap speakers. And there's no internal temperature change. At that moment, Velric, the technician who had handled the scan, stood outside the room, staring at the monitor replay. He looked tired, quiet, but his fingers moved swiftly. Without alerting anyone, he copied the full scan data onto a private drive. Then, toggling the display feed, he initiated a side-by-side analysis. Thermal imaging, vibration analysis, and visual cross-section. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. Just stuffing, wiring, and a near-dead battery. Inside the room, Kalen closed his eyes briefly and inhaled. You are building a case out of noise. Brennick bristled. You concealed a living object. It is not living. It is not concealed. It is a plush toy designed to calm infants. My son is 10 months old. That sound you heard? It's comfort, not threat. Doran glanced at the window, then at Brennick. We should rescan it. No, Brennick snapped. We're not changing direction this late. Elsewhere in the terminal, Selric's stream began gaining traction. First 50 viewers, then 500, then tens of thousands. Footage of Kalen being slammed against the wall. Jarek's frightened voice. The soft, unmistakable purring of the toy cat bristle. Marin Core watched the numbers rise and muttered, Now we have visibility. In the command center, Supervisor Relendrav leaned forward as a red alert appeared on his dashboard. Policy violation flagged. External inquiry pending. He stared at it, then checked the source. TRB, Level 3 oversight. His throat tightened. Back in the lab wing, Velric adjusted the camera feed to show a real-time recording of the toy on a glass table. He gently shook it. It gave off a faint chirp, just fabric, plastic, and speakers. No heat, no muscle movement, just a trembling purr in a quiet room. He uploaded that feed into the scanner's archive log, quietly replacing the prior flag result with the real-time visual. Then to himself, almost inaudibly, he said, This is wrong. The scanner beeped once. Confirmation logged. In the interrogation room, Doran's communicator buzzed. A notification flickered across his screen. External review incoming. Hold proceedings. He looked at Brennick. Sir, we need to pause. We're mid-process, Brennick snapped. No, we're being watched. Turb's launch oversight. Brennick's face drained of color. What? Outside, Selric paced the terminal floor, speaking again to Marin. They're still pushing the arrest. He asked for counsel. They denied. I'm initiating override, Marin replied. Send the name. I'll authorize civilian observer status. Selric nodded once. Name's Kalen Maris. He's the one they're holding. From a detainment monitor, the feed flickered. Then a new overlay appeared, an authorization code from the Travel Equity Review Board, blinking blue. Civilian observer permitted. Case now under preliminary tribunal watch. Velric watched all of it from his quiet corner of the lab, and as attention in the room around him began to shift, he turned once more to the toy cat, still purring faintly with a kind of tired innocence. They think it's alive, he thought, but it's just been misunderstood. He saved one final clip, tagged it with the date, and locked it into a protected drive under a private file. No matter what happened next, the data would remain. The lie they built was beginning to shake at its quietest seam. May I show you something? Dr. Kalen Maris's voice cut through the tension like a thread drawn taut between panic and revelation. His tone was calm, not passive, not pleading, but deliberate, measured. He sat upright in the detainment room, a sterile space humming with fluorescent coldness and silent judgments. Two guards stood rigid by the wall, their eyes flicking between the man they had restrained and the boy who now stood before him, clutching the toy that started it all. Yarrick, cheeks still streaked with tear stains, cradle bristled like a relic. He had begged them to let him carry it in. The officers had allowed it, but only under surveillance, still convinced the plush toy harbored something hidden, something dangerous. Now, in his father's presence, Bristle purred. A soft mechanical trill, designed to soothe infants like Laron, echoed through the room. But to the officers, the sound was still a trigger. One of them flinched. Another instinctively reached for the restraint baton at his side. "Stand back," Officer Dorencall muttered, his voice less confident than before. He hadn't forgotten the scanner anomalies, nor the public scrutiny beginning to tighten its grip around their department. Kalen raised one palm slowly, eyes steady. "You've scanned it. You've isolated it. You've quarantined it. And still, you never looked inside." Before anyone could stop him, he gently took Bristle from his son and turned the toy over with quiet precision. His fingers found the Velcro seam, thin, almost invisible beneath the plush stitching, and pulled it open. Inside, a plastic module with a soft power switch, a backup battery compartment, and a factory brand logo stamped clearly in silver letters. No heart, no bone, no heat signature. Silence filled the room. Doran stepped closer, mouth slightly ajar, eyes locked on the exposed interior of the toy. His hand fell away from his baton. Across the room, Officer Brennick Vale stiffened. His posture was defensive, but his gaze was unblinking now, watching, processing, and somewhere beneath the surface of that cold exterior, doubt began to crack his confidence. "I told you," Yarrick whispered, voice raw but steady. "It's Bristle. That's all he is." Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Supervisor Rellan Drav strode in, eyes blazing with authority, tablet in hand. "Rescan the item," he barked. "Thermal overlay. Now." "No need," said Velric, the quiet technician who had remained seated at the console throughout the ordeal. He didn't look up as he tapped a few keys. "I already did it." Everyone turned toward him. Velric looked up slowly and pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up with a thermal recording. Recorded scan data from just minutes earlier. A transparent outline of the toy, cat appeared in muted blue. No red pulses. No internal warmth. Just cold stuffing and motionless wiring. No heat. No movement. No organic mass, Velric said, his voice matter of fact, yet laced with something sharper. Something dangerously close to contempt. "Whatever you thought you saw wasn't there." A pause. Then, another voice entered the room. "Authorization code K-92. Civilian Compliance Observer Protocol." Everyone turned. Selric Thane, the tall man who had been quietly watching since the start of the incident, now stepped through the open door. He held out a folded ID badge and a digital authorization note from his handheld console. Granted by Marin Corps, he explained, "I'm here under immediate override provision. Independent observer jurisdiction." Drav's jaw clenched. "You can't walk in here and—" "I can," Selric interrupted calmly, his voice like gravel on glass. "You flagged a civilian family based on policy you didn't validate. You escalated without probable cause. You ignored procedural safeguards. Now a tribunal has been notified." Brennick's face paled. Doran took a step back. Velric remained still, fingers resting gently on the control panel, as though daring anyone to challenge what had now been publicly exposed. Kalen looked down at Bristle in his hands, and then up at the men who had spent the past 2 hours tearing apart his family's dignity over a vibrating stuffed animal. He didn't gloat. He didn't accuse. He simply asked, "Will someone now explain to my son why this happened?" No one answered. The screen on Drav's tablet buzzed sharply. A new message flashed in red across his dashboard. "Immediate override misuse detected. External tribunal initiated. Officer conduct under review." The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly felt louder. The walls, once confident in their silence, seemed to lean in, listening. Selric tapped his earpiece, nodded once, then spoke without turning. "Marin says this isn't the first time Halvorth pulled this stunt, but it might be the last time they get away with it." No one moved. Even Laron, nestled against Jarrick's chest, had stopped crying, as if sensing the shift in the air. The storm had not passed. It had just begun to move in a different direction. The toy was never alive, but the consequences were just beginning to breathe. The alert hit Vernon Tross's screen like a thunderclap. His office, perched high above Halvorth Terminal's control tier, was silent except for the low hum of air conditioning and the soft glow of layered monitors. A red overlay pulsed across the central display. External oversight alert. Possible excessive force incident. Civilian family involved. He blinked once, then twice, leaning forward in his chair as the autoplay footage loaded. A man, black, calm, holding an infant being shoved against the terminal wall. A teenage boy clutching a baby carrier, yelling for help. A toy, yes, it looked like a plush cat, snatched away as if it were radioactive. Vernon stared, unblinking, as the playback showed Officer Brennick Vale escalating the situation with no visible resistance from the father. The footage paused automatically on Brennick's face, jaw tight, eyes suspicious. Vernon's cursor hovered over the arrest report. He clicked. Subject resisted seizure class, 5 concealed organism. Plush object emitted active respiration sounds. Suspected bioform attempted low-frequency escape behavior. What in the... he muttered under his breath. He picked up the secure line. It rang twice before Brennick's voice answered, flat and guarded. Officer Vale. Sir, did the subject resist? A pause. No, Director. He didn't resist. But we couldn't be sure what was inside the object. Vernon's grip on the receiver tightened. You detained a civilian with a baby over a plush toy with no confirmation? We had anomaly readings. And protocol. Vernon ended the call mid-sentence and pushed the phone aside like it had stung him. Meanwhile, down in the lower concourse detainment lounge, Kalen Mara sat quietly, Laron asleep against his chest, small fingers curled around his father's collar. The room was dim, neutral in tone, but cold in atmosphere. Yarrick leaned against his father's side, his face pale but steady. The soft purr of the toy bristle echoed from a carrier bag beside them. The door clicked open. A legal liaison entered, young, suit pressed sharp, tablet in hand. Corin Vell looked nervous, not because of the room's tension, but because he already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask. We'd like to offer compensation, Corin began, voice low. For the stress, the detainment, He stopped, seeing the look in Kalen's eyes. Calm, focused, refusing to frame. We're not here for compensation, Kalen said, adjusting Laron gently in his arms. We're here for clarity. Corin hesitated, then gave a shallow nod. No rebuttal, no argument, just understanding, freshly planted. In the adjacent room, Technician Velric sat hunched over a terminal. His heart raced, though he pretended calm. Before him, a screen displayed the full internal scan he had run on Bristle. No heat signature, no motion, no organic life. Just fabric, thread, and a voice box with low battery output. He tapped in a few final commands, copied the scan footage to a backup drive, and reached for the transmission console. Everyone should see this, he muttered, hitting send. In the waiting hall, passengers gathered, their phones buzzing with updates. A new post began to spread, one with a simple title. He was slammed for a toy. Uploaded by Selric Thane, it featured edited footage from the incident. Clipped for clarity, paired with a calm voiceover. This happened today, in our airport, because someone feared a child's toy. The post caught like dry grass to fire. Within 40 minutes, it had been shared thousands of times across commuter platforms, message boards, travel alerts. News aggregators picked it up. The trending tag emerged, #SmuggledStuffCat. Inside the caption, a single quote stood out. It wasn't from Kalen. It wasn't from a reporter. It was from Yarrick. They slammed my father for my baby brother's toy. That line struck harder than data ever could. Velric's scam report, now made public, was reposted in threads with hashtags like #SecurityGoneTooFar and #FearsNotAProtocol. The backlash was immediate. Screenshot of Halverta's override policy began circulating. Travelers in nearby terminals asked questions. Comment sections flooded with outrage, disbelief, and stories of their own near misses. Back in his office, Vernon watched it unfold like an avalanche he couldn't stop. He tapped the intercom. Pull all internal reports for the last 48 hours, he ordered. I want a timeline reconstruction of every officer involved, every scan, every override trigger. Sir, came the voice on the other end, uncertain. We've already received the oversight inquiry memo. Tribunal review is expected within 72 hours. Vernon stood, pressing a hand to the window. Below, the terminal pulsed with life. Streams of passengers moved unknowingly past the spot where Kalen had been pinned, all because no one stopped to ask. No one opened the toy. No one listened. Back in the lounge, Yarrick leaned into his father. Will they believe us now? Kalen looked at the small toy cat resting on the table. It seems visible, its voice module finally silent. They already do, he said softly. A second later, Velric entered with a copy of the scan report printed on glossy paper and handed it to Corin, who read it once, then looked back at Kalen with something different in his eyes, respect. In the public waiting area, a group of reporters had already arrived. They weren't looking for the officers. They were looking for the family. But Kalen didn't go to them. He stayed seated, grounded, let the world move. No apology could rewind the moment the truth was ignored. The officers smirked, confident their authority would protect them, unaware that every passenger, every camera, and every ounce of preparation by the family had already turned the act into a ticking time bomb. If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when strategy meets precision, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The moment the lockdown review alert hit Halvard Terminal's control grid, a silence fell so heavy it almost seemed to distort the humming of the lights. Vernon Traw stood stiffly behind the reinforced glass of the operations deck, reading the public statement he had just authorized. The incident was regrettable. The statement read, an emotionless phrase, deliberately chosen to deflect responsibility, without conceding fault. But the backlash arrived before the sentence could finish rippling across the press feeds. National outlets seized on the footage. Local reporters, previously ignored, surfaced archives of similar force overreach claims. And all at once, Halvard, the terminal known for speed and security, became a case study in failure. In the commission office, Marin Kaur leaned over a long digital screen, tapping with precision. Lines of incident data from the past year stacked up on his display. Immediate safety override, he whispered, watching its invocation appear 17 times in just over a year. Not once had it led to a confirmed threat. But this time was different. This time, a baby's toy had drawn blood, figuratively and almost literally. He flagged Halvard for priority review. A single note blinked red on the case file. Subject, Maris Kalen. Status, detained in error. Child witness. National attention. At the terminal. Kalen sat in a quiet conference room, beside Yarrick, the silence between them laced with emotional static. A press invitation had arrived, asking him to appear on a live panel about traveler safety. He agreed, but only under one condition. Yarrick speaks last, he told him. No negotiations. Yarrick looked up in surprise, but his father gave no explanation. He didn't need to. He knew the strength in Jarrick's voice. He'd heard it when the officers pulled him away. He'd seen it in the boy's hands as he clutched Bristle tighter, not just for Laron, but for himself. The panel was held in the Solvin broadcast atrium, a minimalist space with glass walls and gentle lighting. Across from Kalen sat 3 other men, each one a former victim of terminal overreach. One had been mistaken for a suspect due to facial recognition failure. Another was a linguist detained for suspicious note-taking. The third, a teacher, had been flagged for erratic walking due to a knee brace. They shared stories, calm, composed. But the air buzzed with tension, because everyone knew Kalen Maris wasn't just another passenger. He was the author of the very policy they twisted. When it was his turn, Kalen leaned forward. He did not raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He spoke with the clarity of a man who'd been crushed against a wall and stood back up not out of vengeance, but out of duty. We are at a crossroads, he began, eyes moving across the quiet audience. In our pursuit of safety, we started mistaking calm for deception, compliance for threat. We think silence confirms suspicion, but often silence is strategy. Stillness is dignity. His voice echoed, not loud, but unshakable. When a baby's comfort toy becomes a pretext for force, the issue isn't risk, it's perspective. And when policies built to protect life are used to humiliate it, something far more dangerous than smuggling is at play. Murmurs filled the atrium. The moderator turned to Yarrick, seated quietly beside his father. The boy hadn't moved, except to keep Bristle nestled in his lap. When the mic came to him, Yerrick took it in both hands. He hesitated only once. "They didn't just mistake a toy for a threat," he said, his voice steady, measured. "They mistook calm for guilt. They mistook my father's silence for surrender." The audience went still. The phrase lingered in the air like a hell breath. The host, usually swift to move on, said nothing. Viewers at home saw a close-up of Jarrick's face, older now in his expression than in his years, the plush toy resting like a symbol of everything gone wrong and everything that might still be fixed. Back at Halvorth, Velric stood alone in the technician's bay, scanning updates on his personal terminal. A private message appeared. An invitation to join a startup project focused on redesigning scanner tech for human-centered validation. No sender. No logo. Just coordinates and a promise. "We saw what you did. Let's make something better." Velric stared at the screen, then nodded, quietly. Elsewhere in the terminal, Doran Call sat at his workstation long after his shift had ended. The resignation letter was open on his screen. He had read it 5 times. Written at 6. He pressed send, then stood and walked to the observation deck where Kalen once stood, surrounded by shouting officers. When he spotted him on the screen, now a calm figure under studio lights, he whispered, "I got it wrong." That evening, Doran requested a final meeting. No security, no formality, just a quiet room and a man he owed an apology to. Kalen listened without interrupting. When Doran finished, voice hoarse with remorse, Kalen didn't shake his hand. He didn't offer comfort. He simply looked at him and said, "Growth begins when silence ends." And the world finally was listening. They mistook vigilance for violence, but the world was finally watching. The air inside the Central Transit Safety Commission chamber was sterile and still, as if the walls themselves were waiting to exhale. Soft blue light glowed beneath glass panel nameplates, lining the polished conference table like beacons in a sea of tension. Seated at the far end, Dr. Kalen Maris adjusted his tie, not out of nervousness, but as a gesture of precision. Beside him sat his 12-year-old son, Yerrick, his fingers gently resting on the familiar fabric of bristle, the plush toy cat whose soft purr had once been misheard as a threat. Today, it was no longer a toy. It was evidence. "Dr. Maris," the chairperson called. "You may begin." Kalen rose smoothly. There was no paper in his hands, no teleprompter before him. His memory, sharpened by both intellect and injustice, was more than enough. He looked across the panel. 5 men, 2 advisors, and a review officer behind privacy screen. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen but certainly watching, sat Brennick Vale, the officer who had slammed him into a wall 2 weeks earlier, now suspended and awaiting internal review. Dramatic irony clung to the walls like frost. "My name is Dr. Kalen Maris," he began, voice calm, steady. 2 weeks ago, while traveling with my sons to a medical ethics conference, I was forcibly detained at Halvorth Terminal under suspicion of smuggling a biological life form. That life form was this toy cat. He gestured to Bristle, now nestled in Jarrick's lap, equipped with vibration motor to soothe my infant son, who suffers from sound sensitivity. No one interrupted. He continued, pacing slowly as he spoke. What occurred that day was not simply an overreaction. It was a systemic failure, a failure to verify, a failure to ask the simplest of questions before deploying force, a failure, above all, to recognize the humanity of a father carrying his crying child and a 12-year-old holding a plush animal. Behind the frosted screen, Brennick stiffened. He could hear every word. Kalen leaned slightly on the edge of the table, choosing to lower his voice instead of raise it. "You see, Halvorth Terminal operates under a protocol known as immediate safety override, a clause designed to bypass standard procedure in the face of genuine, time-sensitive biological threats. It was meant for medical emergencies, for pandemic response, for moments where hesitation could cost lives." He paused. "I know this because I helped write it 2 years ago." The silence was absolute. Marin Kaur, seated 2 rows behind the commissioners as the overseeing representative from the Travel Equity Review Board, leaned forward and tapped a small screen. A document illuminated overhead. To support Dr. Maris's claim, Marin said, "We've reviewed Halvorth's override activations. 17 times in the past 14 months. 0 actual threats confirmed. 0 retractions issued. 0 formal apologies. A murmur rippled faintly through the room. Kalen folded his hands, his voice now tinged with restrained urgency. 17 lives or more. Turn inside out because no one checked for a switch, a seam, or a power module. In my case, they didn't even allow me to explain. They saw a sound. They heard a vibration. And they built a threat from that alone. Yerrick glanced up at his father, then back at the commissioners. He remained silent, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. Even Bristle, soft and inanimate in his hands, seemed to hum with significance. A commissioner adjusted his glasses. And your recommendation, Dr. Maris? Kalen nodded. I propose a new safeguard, the Laron Clause, named after my youngest son, who cried helplessly in his brother's arms while I was thrown against a wall for carrying a vibrating toy. The clause would mandate a layered verification protocol before any biological attainment can be enforced. This includes visual inspection, secondary scan confirmation, and officer discretion logs, all completed before escalation. Another commissioner tapped his pen on the desk. That would require retraining thousands of officers. Yes, Kalen said, but fewer than the number of travelers will wrongly harm if we don't. In a side panel room, Brennick watched the live feed, face unreadable. His fingers twitched. The very man he dismissed as a threat was now writing the policy that might one day stop another officer from making the same mistake. But behind the tension in Kalen's words, there was no thirst for revenge. Only structure, only clarity. Marincourt raised one final point, eyes locked on the commission. If this clause had been in place at Halvorth, the scanner technician's findings, the visual inspection, and the toys branded would have immediately cleared the situation. Instead, it escalated a force twice. On what authority? On what evidence? No one answered. Kalen took his seat again, exhaling slowly. Yerrick reached up and touched his hand. You did good, the boy whispered. Kalen smiled, but his eyes remained focused ahead. There was still more to do, but for the first time in weeks, the silence around him didn't feel like the quiet before another blow. It felt like consideration, accountability, change. And from the unseen corner of the room, where cameras couldn't reach, someone was listening not to fight, but perhaps, just perhaps, to understand. The same toy they fear became the blueprint for what comes next. The Laron Clause passed unanimously. The moment the final vote was cast, a quiet ripple moved through the polished chamber, not of celebration, but of solemn recognition. The clause wasn't just policy. It was an apology wrapped in reform, a law carved from the silence that followed a child's cry. Across the digital scrolls and enforcement boards, one name began to appear, Laron Maris. Not as a suspect, not as a threat, but as the reason the system had to change. At Halvorth Terminal, change arrived like a winter front, cold, swift, and sweeping. Inside the sterile security wing, scanners were being dismantled piece by piece, their calibration systems spread out across long aluminum tables like surgical tools. Velric, now appointed the lead of the newly formed tech validation team, leaned over a schematic of the older scanning grid. He circled a waveform reading that had once triggered suspicion. See this? He told a younger technician beside him. That's the battery motor. Not a heartbeat, but someone called it respiration. His voice was calm, but his eyes bore the weight of someone who had seen what misinterpretation could cost. In another wing, Doran Call adjusted his tie nervously before stepping onto a training stage. Rows of rookie officers sat in silence. He cleared his throat. I was the one who radioed in the alert, he began. I didn't double-check. I trusted fear over facts. And I watched a man get slammed into a wall for a child's toy. The silence deepened. He continued anyway. You will feel pressure to act fast. That's not the same as acting right. Behind him, a screen displayed Bristle, the now famous plush cat, alongside a quote from the tribunal summary. Threat level, non-existent. Meanwhile, Vernon Tross, once the terminal's command director, signed the last of his retirement papers. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't issue a farewell statement. He simply left. His replacement, an interim director named Voss, arrived with a clipboard and a single goal: transparency. His first act? Make an entire override protocol publicly viewable and traceable. It wasn't just policy, it was witness. The reform announcement was scheduled at the base of the main atrium, where the incident had first unraveled. A temporary case had been installed there, clear on all sides and guarded not by force, but by symbolism. Inside rested Bristle, the soft gray toy with a purring mechanism and a Velcro seam. The sign read, "Object misidentified as biological threat, March 2074. No dramatics, no apology cards, just truth and the quiet weight it carried. Kalen Maris stepped through the arrival gate with Lara on his arms and Yarrick beside him. It was their first return to Halvard Terminal since the incident, and every staffer in the terminal had been briefed not on protocol, but on presence. This wasn't security detail. It was restoration. A young male attendant approached with a practiced smile. "May I help with the backpack, sir?" he asked. Before Kalen could respond, Yarrick gently stepped forward and adjusted the strap himself. His voice was steady but kind. "It's okay. He's with me." A few passengers paused nearby, some realizing who they were. There were no gasps, no selfies, just a growing respect that radiated from quiet recognition. The dramatic irony was heavy, almost poetic. The same backpack that once held Bristle now moved unbothered through crowd. No scanner alarms, no clipped radio calls. The child had grown, but more importantly, so had the space around him. Outside, news feeds ran coverage of the reform's rollout. Commentators praised the clause. Critics demanded it be applied to all 38 terminals nationwide. Velrick's team was already at work designing a universal calibration patch. Doran seminars were being scheduled across 4 major training academies. Even Marin Kaur, the compliance investigator who had triggered the tribunal, released a statement acknowledging that the clause represented not just protection, but prevention. And in the middle of it all, Kalen Maris walked to the terminal not as a suspect, not as a policy author, but as a father who refused to yell, to fight, to escalate, who had waited for the world to quiet down so it could finally hear the truth. Sometimes it takes the smallest thing to fix something far too big. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, sealed in a pale blue envelope with no return address. Yarrick found it tucked between a few school notifications and a flyer for a local science fair. He turned it over in his hands, surprised. No one sent handwritten letters anymore. Not really. He sat cross-legged on the living room rug, Lara on napping in the carrier seat nearby, the soft rhythm of Bristle's old per module faint beneath a blanket. Kalen was upstairs reviewing a set of policy drafts for another upcoming conference. The light filtering through the window cast a gentle hue on the boy's face as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single note, folded once, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. Never underestimate the power of a voice that speaks when others don't. Below the line was a small printed photo, an image Yarrick immediately recognized. It was a screenshot from Selric Thane's livestream, the very moment the officers had dragged his father from the boarding gate. His own quote had been pinned beneath the video. "They slammed my father for my baby brother's toy." Yarrick stared at it in silence. Then, slowly, a half-smile touched the corner of his mouth, not out of joy, but something steadier. Recognition. Validation. Upstairs, Kalen read through a draft titled Child-Centered Response Protocols in Security-Heavy Environments. He'd already been asked to consult on upcoming changes at 3 different terminals, and the requests kept coming. The events at Halvard had opened a wound no one could pretend wasn't there anymore. Still holding the letter, Yarrick climbed the stairs. "They sent this," he said, handing it over. Kalen read the message quietly, his eyes softening. "Selric," he murmured. "He's still watching." He placed the letter down on the desk. "You made them listen, Yarrick." "Not me." Yarrick didn't answer right away. He looked over at the wall, with a framed scan of Bristle hung. The same toy sat beside it, cleaned, repaired, and untouched since the day they returned. It had become a kind of relic in the house. A reminder. Later that week, the 3 of them flew out again, this time not for a hearing or a confrontation, but for a child safety conference held in Veldrin City. Laron slept through most of the flight, and Yerrick read quietly while Kalen prepared his slides. No fanfare, no fear, just focus. After Kalen's talk, a steady, measured breakdown of procedural error and trauma impact on minors, a young officer approached the stage. His badge Red Raven held. He looked nervous, barely in his 20s, cap in his hands. "I just want to say," the officer began, his voice tight with hesitation, "thank you. I didn't understand half of what we were enforcing until this story. Your reforms, they've made my job make more sense. And less fear-driven." Kalen extended his hand, firm and warm. "Then they're working," he said. But the turning point came later that evening, after they returned home. Yerrick walked past a display shelf, glanced at Bristle, then paused. He stood still for a long time, eyes on the toy. Then, with careful fingers, he lifted the plush cat from its place. "Dad," he said. Kalen looked up from his tablet. I want to give Bristle away." There was silence. Kalen's brows furrowed, not in disapproval, but in curiosity. "Are you sure?" Yerrick nodded. "He's done his part. Some other kid might need him more." It was a simple sentence, but in Kalen's chest, it struck like thunder. He stood, walked to his son, and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure he's placed somewhere that remembers why." 2 weeks later, Bristle sat inside a glass display case at the traveling exhibit Justice in Motion, objects that sparked reform. The curator, a quiet historian named Derek Maris, had made the arrangements personally after hearing the story. The exhibit moved from city to city, a collection of small items that carried enormous meaning: an empty ID badge from a wrongly detained worker, a torn uniform from protest, and now, a plush toy cat misread as a biological threat. Under Bristle's clear box was a placard etched in matte steel. Object misidentified as threat, 2074. As visitors passed, they paused, some confused, others already familiar. A small screen beside the display looped Jarrick's now famous quote, and the footage from Selrick's livestream. On quiet days, children pressed their hands against the glass, watching Bristle's faded stitches, wondering how something so small could have caused so much noise. But it was never about the noise. It was about who refused to be quiet when it mattered. As Yerrick stepped back from the exhibit's ribbon-cutting ceremony, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply turned, looked at his father, and gave a nod. Kalen returned it. At the far end of the hall, a traveler pointed at the toy and asked his companion, "What's that one?" The man answered softly, "That's the cat they thought was alive." Turned out the truth was... Outside, the sun dipped behind the tall glass dome of the exhibit center. The air felt clean, weightless. In the silence between moments, between judgments and apologies, between policy and perception, something had shifted, and as the exhibit curator logged the final entry of the day, he paused to write a closing sentence for the archival file. In every misjudged silence, there's a story waiting to speak. The statue had just been unveiled, not with fanfare, not with speeches, just a slow, precise pulling back of a deep blue cloth as morning sunlight streamed across the front of Halvard Terminal. No brass band, no applause, just silence and a kind of collective breath held in quiet reverence. The figure was not a famous man, not a politician, or a soldier or saint. It was a father carved in gentle, muted bronze, his arms wrapped protectively around a crying infant, while beside him, a young boy clutched a small toy cat in one hand, his other gripping the hem of his father's coat. Beneath the statue, etched cleanly into a flat steel plaque, the words read. They slammed him for what they didn't understand. He stood back up for those who never should have to. From a short distance away, Kalen Maris stood with his sons, Laron resting against his shoulder, now larger and heavier than he'd been that day a year ago, and Yerrick, a step taller, standing silent at his father's side. They remained in the crowd like anyone else. No press invitation, no reserved seats, no formal acknowledgement. That had been Kalen's request. This moment wasn't for credit. It was for correction. As passers-by slowed, murmuring softly, some began reading the plaque aloud. Others paused at the sight of the child's toy, Bristle, so carefully rendered in metal that it seemed soft, almost huggable. One traveler whispered to a companion, "That's the one. That's the man from the story." Another pulled up an old post on their phone, the one that had gone viral. The quote from Yerrick, screen captured beneath millions of views. "They slammed my father for my baby brother's toy." Nearby, Vernon Tross, now quietly retired, watched from behind dark glasses. He hadn't been invited either, but he needed to see it. The mistake, immortalized. The correction, permanent. Dramatic irony hovered over the moment like a thin mist. The very place that had tried to erase Kalen with silence now bore his image in bronze. The same walls that once echoed with accusation now stood watch as people remembered, learned, reflected. For travelers with children, the statue became a stop. For officers passing through, it became a checkpoint of the soul. As the crowd shifted, a uniformed officer approached the statue and paused. He was young, unsure. His name tag read Ryan. He looked at the plaque, then at Kalen, recognizing him instantly. Nervously, he stepped closer. "Dr. Maris?" the officer asked, voice low. Kalen turned, calm as ever. "Yes." Ryan swallowed, then said, I was just cleared for a new role at Central Terminal. I reviewed the Laron clause this week. It's good policy. Clear. It helps." There was no defensiveness in his tone, only gratitude. "I'm glad," Kalen said simply, then extended his hand. Ryan took it without hesitation. They stood in mutual silence before the statue. In the background, a young boy tugged at his father's coat, pointing to the sculpture. "Is that real, Daddy?" The father knelt and replied, "It was. That's why it's here." Later that night, at home, the Maris apartment was quiet. The lights were low, and the hum of distant traffic felt miles away. Yerrick sat on the couch beside his father, flipping slowly through a digital article about the unveiling. Laron had fallen asleep on Kalen's chest, thumb tucked under his cheek, soft breaths rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Yerrick leaned his head against his father's shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't yell," he said softly, eyes not leaving the screen. "You made them listen." Kalen turned, placing a firm, steady hand on his son's shoulder. His voice was calm, certain, and laced with the weight of every moment that had passed since that day. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that waits for the world to quiet down. Seconds later, the truth came out. The father was vindicated, and the officers froze as accountability struck instantly. The toy cat became a symbol of their folly, and the airline faced the consequences of their arrogance. If you believe real authority acts with foresight, discipline, and unstoppable force, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores misunderstandings, authority gone too far, and the unexpected consequences of overreaction. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage reflection on fairness, accountability, and protecting the innocent.